light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. In contemplating conflict and the way it plays out within our world of late, something that seems to be a common thread in all of it, I guess, is that humanity seems to be wrestling with a virtual epidemic of narcissism. As a child, I was always very fascinated by Greek mythology. And so I would read those stories, and then of course from that I began reading folk tales and fairy tales from countries all over the world, and a lot of Asian folk tales also. And I found all the stories absolutely fascinating, but in focusing upon the story of Narcissus, from which the whole idea of narcissism arises, the basic version of the story I recall is that he was a young man who was so beautiful that he saw his reflection in a pond and fell in love with his own reflection and stared at it until he literally withered away and died. Of course, the story doesn't make a lot of sense, because as you wither away and die, you wouldn't be all that beautiful anymore. In using that story, though, as a metaphor, as an analogy or an allegory, trying to think of all the different things that we can learn from that, it occurs to me, when people see someone who may actually be narcissistic or selfish or self-centered, whatever term you want to use, they sometimes say he's just full of himself. But in the true sense, Narcissus was not full of himself. He actually was distracted by his reflection and never made any connection with the true substance of who and what he was. He never knew himself. The only thing he saw was a reflection. For each of us, there is a certain reflection, a certain image that society reflects back to us, that you're the smart one, you're the athletic one, you're the, whatever label society puts on us. And then with that come these expectations that we're supposed to live up to that label and act like the label assigned to us instead of acting like ourselves. And then when it extends to occupations, you're the janitor, you're the administrator, you're the principal, you're the singer, you're the engineer, and suddenly there are expectations assigned to that too, some of which we may be able to satisfy and some of which we can't, and so we wind up disappointing each other. In love, in looking at each other with love and recognizing each other as an individual, the only expectation we need to have of each other is that we will act like ourselves, that we will tell the truth, that if we can do it, we'll say so, and if we can't, we'll say so, and if we think we can figure it out if we work on it a while, we can say that too. It's not an either or, yes or no, black or white. It's recognizing that within the world there is so much diversity that the polarity of being right or wrong, yes or no, one or the other, that's very much a human creation. My encouragement to everyone I talk to is to move from either or thinking into both and thinking, to look for solutions where we can solve both your problem and mine. We can address that challenge and this one. Too often people will say there is nothing that will do both, it will be one or the other. I don't know that that is as true as people want it to be, and I say want it to be only because there are people who seem unwilling to do the necessary work to find the answer. In most cases, if we look long enough and are patient enough and work with the material enough, we will find contrasts and paradoxes that prove to be true, where lo and behold it can be both and. A song that can be both sung and spoken. Music that can be both heard and silent. Some of these explanations get into philosophical and psychological perceptions. If we see it in our minds instead of experiencing it with our bodies, well, is that more or less real? There is a sense in which everything within our minds is just as real as what we experience with our bodies. A sense in which who I really am, on one level is a physical body, but on another level is a spirit and a unique consciousness, a unique perspective, a unique way of thinking. I read some time ago about a particular political demonstration where there was a clash between security forces who were ordered to be nothing more than the will of the government. And the people showed up and they wanted to remind these law enforcement personnel that they were people too. That they were in fact working class people too. That they were not rich aristocracy. They were human beings with unique faces and unique passions and beliefs. And so the demonstrators arrived and they carried mirrors and they stood on the line facing the law enforcement personnel who would not allow them to pass, and they held up mirrors so that the law enforcement personnel could see themselves and see how they looked in the role that they were performing. And the hope ultimately was that all of the people would join together and confront their leaders and say, you are not serving the best interests of your people. You are, and we are holding you accountable. As I pondered this whole notion of accountability, because especially in political activist circles and social activist circles, there was a lot of talk about holding leaders accountable. If you hire someone to be an administrator, are they doing their administration well? If you hire someone to be a representative of the people, are they representing the people? Or are they representing peculiar economic interests that they have been bribed to represent? How do we hold them accountable? That's one half of the equation. From the flip side, if roles were reversed, if I were the person in the position of authority, it would make perfect sense for me to embrace accountability, because accountability is ultimately the corollary of trust. The person who is not willing to be held accountable should never be trusted. The person who wants to be trusted needs to be willing to be held accountable. In the same way that if I buy a product from a retail store and take it home and find out that the product is defective, it doesn't work the way the advertising on the package says that it should, I can take it back to the store and say, it doesn't work. It's brand new. I just took it out of the box. I plugged it in and it doesn't work. And they would say, oh, I'm sorry, here, let us get you a replacement. And they would stand behind their merchandise. They would be held accountable for what they sold me, and they would give me a product that worked, or they would refund my money. Or they might offer to refund my money, and I might say, no, what I need more than the money is the tool that works. Do you have one of these that works? Because this one doesn't. And so the store would be accountable to providing a workable item for the sum of money that they had charged me. In the same sort of way, when we elect government representatives, when we elect church leaders, any sort of election, any sort of choice, there is an accountability that that person has a job to do that is defined in some way by the larger system, and that if they do not perform that job, they need to be removed from that position and replaced with somebody who does. They're accountable for their work in the same way that the store is accountable for selling good merchandise, and the mechanic who fixes my car is accountable to actually fix the car for the money that he has paid. And if he works on the car and it's not fixed, there is no license to go back and charge me more money for doing more repairs for something that I'd already paid to be fixed and wasn't. It breaks down trust. If he's going to charge me money for something that isn't fixed, in a sense he's lying, saying, I fixed your car, give me the money, when in fact he didn't fix the car. So that's a lie. It is frustrating to me when I say to people, wherever I go and have for many years, that we need to get back to having honest politicians, and everyone begins to laugh, because it has become such a common belief that politicians are dishonest, that they are subject to bribes, that they do not believe in honor, that they do not believe in the best interests of their people, that they are manipulators, and so on. That's a categorical description. I believe there are some politicians who are not representative of that description. That if that's what politicians are, then they're not politicians, but they may be holding public office. When I was in graduate school, I had a discussion with someone who was describing all the sins of white people, and I asked them for a definition of white people, and they gave me their definition of the category of white people. And at the end of their description, I said, there was not one thing you mentioned that has ever been part of my actual life experience. All of the things you listed have not been, it is not things I've experienced, not things I've done, not things I've ever believed. So if I'm not a white person, what am I? Well, I'm a person. A person is a person is a person is a person. As Sister Who, I try to be an authentic, honest, virtuous, unique who, a person. And then over and above that, rather than simply saying, oh, that's enough, I know who I am now. Well, but who I am is affected, or my expression of who I am is affected by additional layers. In the same way that if you cut an onion in half, there's a certain part in the center, and then there are layers coming all the way to the outside. And until you open up the onion, you can't see what the inner layers are. And at the very center of the onion is often one that is green. Who would have guessed? The outside of the onion might be white or whatever other color, but you get all the way to the center, and lo and behold, there's part of the onion that is still green on the inside, still green and growing. In a similar sort of way, at the heart, I am a unique who, a unique perspective, a unique voice. On top of that, I have a male body, and I have to, if I want to be a whole person, I have to wrestle with the meaning and the significance of being a male human being. How is this unique perspective and this unique person that I am, how is its expression affected and influenced by speaking through a male body, by having specifically male experiences in the shaping and development of my thoughts and my self-identity? And then further, once I have some basic idea of the difference it makes to be a man as opposed to if I had been born in a woman's body, that at that point to then wrestle with what is the significance of being gay instead of being straight, of being homosexual instead of being heterosexual, of being a marginalized population, of being a minority, so that every movie I see, when two people fall in love, it's always a man and woman, and I'm excluded because that's not my story. For many, many years, people of other races would go to movies, and the people who fell in love were always white. Finding movies of black people falling in love, of Asian people falling in love, of Asian people coming to terms with emigrating outside of their country and having to adjust to contrasting cultural norms. These are all shifts and changes that many people have wrestled with, and each individual has experienced them and responded to them in unique ways, none of which are inherently right or wrong. It's all part of a more complete understanding of what it means to be human. So in having these shows and encouraging these sorts of thoughts and discussions and dialogues, And I am always open to having new guests on the show. So if you're watching this show and you would like to be a guest on the show to discuss some issue or topic or concern in a deeper way, I welcome you, I invite you to contact me, and we'll make arrangements if we can, and have that discussion on the show so that other people can listen in. By having these intelligent, mutually respectful dialogues and digging into, yes, but what does it really mean? And this is the idea, but does it really work that way in practice? There is a common assumption at the present time that if someone makes all the right choices, that one really can be successful in avoiding all misfortune throughout life. That if you make all the right choices, you will never be poor, you will never be sick, you will never be robbed, you will never be affected by anything negative. I don't know that that's actually true, because there have been people who made all the right choices, and then suddenly it was taken from them by someone who was stronger than they were. Or they made all the right choices, they were a successful businessman in a particular Middle Eastern city, and suddenly they were bombed. And the place where they used to work was now a ruin, a rubble, a crater in the ground. And they couldn't go to work and earn money to maintain their house anymore, and after a while they didn't have a house to go home to because that was bombed too. They had made all the right choices. There was no way for them to know that a missile was coming, that a war would begin at a certain point in time. And even if they had known that, would they have been allowed to emigrate to a country that didn't experience that war? And at various times in history, unfortunately, it has gotten to the point where there was virtually nowhere on the planet that wasn't at war, where we had world wars that affected everyone. On a lesser note, that points to what I've read about and is referred to as the butterfly effect. The idea that even with the smallest things, a butterfly may flap its wings on the far side of the planet and it will somehow affect, it'll affect the next thing, which will affect the next thing, which will affect the next thing. It becomes a row of dominoes falling down all in a row until it affects some massive thing way at the top that knows nothing about the butterfly that started the whole chain reaction. Because that's how interconnected our world is, it is so imperative that we all take care of each other, that we don't get into thinking it's either you or me, when in fact it has to be both of us, because it's only as we work together that we have any hope of surviving at all. If all the plants on Earth were demolished and burned away and non-existent, where would we get the oxygen when we breathe? If all of the people on Earth were to die, where would the plants get the carbon dioxide that they need? The world is a very symbiotically interwoven place. One thing provides this, the other thing provides that, and they both need each other in order to survive. The farmer and the doctor, the engineer, the janitor, the administrator, everything's also interconnected. To me it seems like common sense, and yet there is this, the current system has so much competitiveness built into it, and so many wrong ideas, and I call them wrong ideas because I see how they're destructive. I find over and over and over again, when you measure, when money becomes the measure of a person, of a community, of value, when money becomes the measure of value of a person, inclusivity is the first thing to suffer. Those who are not deemed as valuable are excluded. To the extent that they're excluded, we may have no answer for a particular problem that comes up later. In the movie Star Trek IV, the problem they ran into was that this strange spaceship appeared on Earth, and what they discovered was that it was looking for the songs that were made by whales, that somehow what whales were doing in singing their songs deep in the oceans was communicating with extraterrestrial life. And this spaceship was destroying the Earth by vaporizing all the oceans, trying to find the whales, trying to figure out where the whales went, because they were made extinct. And so to save the Earth, they had to travel back in time and get a whale to come talk to this spaceship in order to make it stop vaporizing the oceans and destroying the planet, because they had no other way of communicating. That was just one example. Granted, an imagined example, but I think a very legitimate example. In a similar sort of way, if we eliminate farms, there's no place to grow food. There are other alternatives, thankfully, but to approach the scale of the farms and the agrarian cultures that cover the planet, I don't remember the particular source, but I read a number of years ago that when you actually take the entire human population and measure all the city people against all the country people, all the farmers, all those living in agrarian settings, that the city people are actually a minority of the human population. There are more people living on farms and in rural settings and in jungles, and the cities, from a certain perspective, are really not a very intelligent way of even doing human civilization, because it creates a concentration that requires everything to be shipped into this concentration instead of spreading it out evenly and making the population close to the food supply, and there are ways of traveling between, but to do that we have to have languages. We have to learn each other's languages, and we have to be willing to collaborate instead of compete. It's unfortunate, I suppose, that from one perspective, that Plato is regarded as one of the fundamental wise thinkers of Western civilization, because his basic construct of community was this notion that there always has to be somebody else to exploit, someone else to conquer, someone else's resources to steal. It was not a balanced, symbiotic approach to human civilization. Perhaps in some respect it was a necessary phase for humanity's development. But I pray and hope that we are now at a point where we can leave behind the competitiveness and the imperial method of conquering someone else and taking their resources, and begin to create self-sustaining regenerative systems where we're not using up our resources, and we're not taking somebody else's resources, and we're not depending upon there being someone else from whom to steal. But instead we're creating renewable energy and renewable systems and non-competitive systems, because we hopefully will finally learn to value every individual, to value every voice, to value every perspective, and to be less concerned about the categorical descriptions. The thing to remember about categorical descriptions is that they are for conversation. They are not for definition. The category will never tell me who you are, or how you think, or what you need, or what you believe, or how you speak. You are a unique individual, and I need to address you as such. The category is just a conversational handle to say, this is a category with which you seem to have some commonality. How do you differ or emulate that categorical label? How is this white person like all other white people, and how is this white person different from all other white people? And as we begin to make that list and get specific and see the individual and know the individual, there will be so much more to love, and so much more to work with, and so much more to build on. We empower ourselves by valuing each other. We disempower ourselves and weaken ourselves and make it impossible to survive by devaluing and excluding and disallowing others. It is only when we join hands that collaborative works happen that could not happen any other way. Even for some of the architectural wonders, the Great Wall of China, the pyramids of Egypt, these could not be built by single individuals. Even for what any person in a modern country lives in at this point, the house may use plumbing and electrical and construction. Those are all diverse trades. nobody is totally self-sufficient. We are dependent upon each other. We're dependent upon services we don't know and supplies we can't access. As we come down to the last few minutes of our show, there's a song I would like to share with you, just the chorus, I guess, that I wrote a number of years ago as a refrain to use within one of the, I guess you'd call them, modern sorts of morality plays that I've written, that addresses this, the miracle of collaboration and togetherness and what it can create. Hands holding hands can hold the world. Hearts holding hearts can live anew. My hand to yours and your heart to mine can make every dream come true. Hands holding hands can hold the world. Hearts holding hearts can live anew. My hand to yours and your heart to mine can make every dream come true.